is titled Harnessing Advanced Technologies for Swarm Operations Within CJADC2. Our presenter is Mr. Tim Stewart. He draws over 20 years of experience in hardware and software. He has served as both Vice President of Development and Strategic Account Manager at Quantum 3D and spent 2 years with ADM as their Senior Strategic Alliance Manager. He holds a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from Boston University and serves as executive MBA class mentor at California State University, East Bay. With that, I'll turn it to Mr. Stewart.
I'm Tim Stewart. I'm the Director of Business Development from Aitech. I'm joined here today by my co-authors of the paper, Emil Kafitz and David Taylor from Thunder Bay Consulting. I'm happy to be here, especially after my presentation last year about decision superiority. After that presentation, that white paper presentation, I learned so much, and it was such a great experience. I couldn't wait to be standing here today. Although I must confess, given the size of the audience, I'm not sure why. But it was a great experience, and I'm glad to be here. I want to tell you why I wrote this white paper. As many of you, I'm sure, have also seen on the news, the dramatic news that's come out of the Ukraine on the drones and the operations that have been used to great effect there. And one day there was some particularly dramatic footage, and I must confess that I had a little bit of bravado. It's like, yeah, good guys are winning. That night, my subconscious had a different viewpoint, and I had a nightmare the likes of which I have not had since childhood. A drone swarm is a terrifying thing. I want you to imagine, to give some context to the presentation, the things I'm about to say, separate from the presentations prior to mine, some context. There are 16 air vents above us in this room right now. I want you to imagine that they are each drones, and their mission is to disrupt your mission and put your team at risk. I give a lot of presentations, and I get a lot of questions, and I know there's a lot of concern about whether or not we're turning over too much to AI. Are we giving up too much control? And as evidenced by the mistakes I'm about to make, I want you to all be assured that there is most definitely a human in this loop. I've got a limited amount of time to make an impact here. So I'm going to give you the 3 things I want you to remember up front about my presentation, and I'll make it easy to remember. I-O. The integration of advanced technologies, the importance of open standards as been discussed earlier today, and the operational impact and challenges that go along with the scale of the things that we're talking about here in terms of drone operations underneath the umbrella of GVSETS2. A little bit of background in terms of understanding drone swarm operations. We know what a drone swarm is, but I'll point out one of the things that you may not be aware of is that the drone swarm concept applies to things that are not physical. It could be a cyber attack, of cyber agents. That could be considered a swarm concept and operation. And they share the characteristics of having agility in being able to move around obstacles, either cyber or physical. They're adaptable, and they are extraordinarily distributed in nature. The challenges and the opportunities are for utilizing and defending against drones and impact on ground operations. The early versions of this white paper talked about offense and defense of swarm operations. But it quickly became apparent that it's not a matter of offense and defense in swarms, but also being able to do operations that includes both offense and defense. The role of the GVSETS2 framework. CJADC2, the combined joint all-domain command and control. It is a DoD initiative, so it's not associated specifically with the Army, the Navy, Air Force, Marines. It's a DoD initiative. And its purpose is to enhance command and control, again, across all domains. And also with the combined forces for our foreign military partners. It foments rapid decision-making, coordinated actions, and it emphasizes the importance of integration for the operational effectiveness and agility, compatibility with existing infrastructures, and the bottom line is optimizing the kill chain from sensors to shooters. CJADC2 is a good initiative. It's worth a 10 or 15 minute read because the DoD does a good job of laying out the framework, the guidelines, and the lines of effort without specifying the technologies, some of which I'm going to be talking about here specifically. The other thing that CJADC2 does well is that it explains a very complicated concept in very simple terms. Sense, make sense, act. I'm sure many of you recognize the applicability and the parallel of sense, make sense, and act to the OODA loop, which I discussed last year during my white paper presentation. But this is the essence of CJADC2. Sensors gather the data, and specifically data, not information. And it's not information until you make sense of it, and then you act on the information. Common and shared sensing methodology, analyzing and understanding the data and predicting the outcomes, and then analyzing execution and disseminating the information so that it can be acted upon by the commanders in the field. The next couple of slides, I'm going to talk about some of the technology that is part of drone swarm operations underneath CJADC2. And again, CJADC2 doesn't specify the technologies. It leaves that to the services and industry. But these next couple of technologies are ones that are manifest and are becoming sources of expertise and effort for realizing the vision of CJADC2. Artificial intelligence. It's applicable not only for the management of the drone swarms themselves, but in the development of the AI algorithms to aid in decision making. For example, being an adaptive response to a drone swarm. Is it a large drone swarm, a small one? Is it a mixture of drones? Is there a diversionary attack? Is there something else happening in the theater of operations that would affect the drone swarm operation? Is it a feint? So these types of things AI can help with in terms of dealing with drone swarm operations within CJADC2. TSN. I'm going to talk about TSN a little bit differently than has been before my previous presentations, but the presentations that have come prior to mine today. I'm not going to go into the technical detail about TSN, but I will talk about TSN in terms of what it means. As was described earlier, TSN means that the network doesn't slow down. we've all had this experience that the network's slow. When you're in a high-risk environment, that's a lousy time for the network to be slow. TSN says a guarantee that messages, critical messages, will get there in a certain amount of time. So conceptually, to the sense, make sense, and act diagram that was before, TSN is the technology that could be between the boxes, making the data, passing to make sense, and then passing that to act in a secure and deterministic set amount of time. The other thing I will say about this in terms of context, I have the advantage of the opportunity to talk to many different types of groups, both industry and government. I will tell you, the Army has it right on TSN. TSN is enabling technology, and my opinion is that the Army has got it right, and they need to turn up the volume on the work that they've done and the leadership that they are showing on TSN with the other services. So the Army's got it right, turn up the volume. The reason is that if there are other services, there are other large programs that also fulfill their needs through TSN, two things will happen. Schedules will move to the left and the prices will come down for such an enabling technology. The Army's got it right. Move forward and turn up the volume. Sensor fusion and data integration. So sense could be many different things. I've listed out a couple of here: radar, electro-optical, infrared, cyber sensors, and there are more. The key thing is, in terms of sensor fusion, is that your view of the world is better if you're able to combine sensor inputs. Maybe there's something coming from an IR sensor that doesn't show as well from a radar sensor or a LiDAR sensor. So your view of the world is better given multiple different types of sensors. So a key part of CJADC2 is being able to take those different types of sensors and give a common picture to increase soldiers' situational awareness. And the bottom lines here is certainly that it would improve the target acquisition capabilities and also mitigate threats to swarm operations, either offense or defense. Autonomous systems and robots. So a swarm operation can be part of a larger operation. And this was talked about in the keynote address panel this morning, where they talked about HMIF. And being able to combine swarm operations and make them part of a unit or a platoon that is also deployed and addressing threats and mitigating risks. And again, in the concept of CJADC2, it is across all domains. And it is across a wide operational footprint because it includes all the services. And given the C of CJADC2, it also includes foreign military allies. Cybersecurity. All of the things that I've mentioned before and talked about have to be done in a cyber secure environment. This slide alone and the topic of cybersecurity could take up like an hour presentation just by itself. For the presentation here today, I'll just point out that it's a necessary thing in all the things that we've talked about so far. And I'll further point out that it's not necessary to destroy the connection between sense, make sense, and act It's only a requirement to disrupt in order to have it be a real problem and put your team and your mission at risk. So it has to be guarded against, and it has to be guarded against a priori. And the other aspect that was brought up, pointed out during one of the presentations this morning, and it was a great phrase the gentleman used, was, after all the preparation, what do you do when it's in the room? Quote unquote, the risk is in the room. You've already been invaded. There's already a risk. What do you do then? So that's another aspect that I learned about today that was implied here, but not as clear as it was after that presentation. So not only is it preventive measures taking place a priori, but also what happens after the threat is, quote unquote, in the room. MOSA. I'm not going to talk about the details here. There's been many presentations about what MOSA is, what it does, what its benefits are. All those benefits are directly applicable and consistent with the CJADC2 framework. And I will put a finer point on it. The vision and the initiative of CJADC2 isn't possible without MOSA. It's too big a problem. It's too complicated. You can't get there with the time that we have and the money that we have without MOSA and open standards. One key aspect of that in such a complicated system that was talked about a little bit this morning, but it is of particular importance for deploying and developing a complex system like CJADC2 is rapid development. Okay? CJADC2 is enormous. Being able to rapidly prototype capabilities and demonstrate them is a key part of being able to have a successful initiative of CJADC2. So MOSA, you can't get there to CJADC2 without MOSA. Some of the successes in swarm operations you have to address in terms of the interoperability. As I mentioned before, the joint across the services. And then the C, the combined, the foreign militaries and allies. And then the technical complexities in terms of the specific advanced technologies that I've mentioned before, AI, TSN, sensor fusion, the autonomous systems, and cybersecurity. Success in these areas defines success in swarm operations underneath CJADC2. Strategies and best practices for the success. Standardization, again, goes along with modular design principles. The collaborative development, as was talked about in many of the presentations before, the collaboration between industry and government. The testing, the rapid testing of integrated solutions, the continuous evaluation that's necessary to be able to deploy and develop such a complex system, and the constant implementation of improvements. The advantages of swarm operations, because again, it's offensive as well as defensive nature of swarm operations, is that you can rapidly enhance their capabilities, and there's operational resilience. There's many of them, and it's scalable. It's scalable across different operational scenarios across the various domains, land, air, sea. The mission success can be coordinated among agile swarm deployments, and as we had talked about before, the importance of HMIF, the human-machine integrated formations. Specifically, there was a presentation this morning where they talked about Project 10X, where you're taking a small group of soldiers, and you're not just doing incremental improvements, but the goal was to do an order of magnitude 10X. And one of the ways to do that was to be able to team that group of soldiers with robotic systems integrated with their formations. In summary, getting back to the three, I'll end where I began, which is the three focus points. The integration of advanced technologies, some of the ones that we talked about specifically, the importance of the open standards, specifically of MOSA, and then the third one is the operational aspects and challenges that go along with a program such as CJADC2. Prototype and experimentation, again, as a benefit of MOSA, being able to rapidly test and roll out new capabilities. And recommendations and final thoughts, future military applications and developments, again, projects like Project 10X and others, ongoing research and development under CJADC2, given that it does not specify specific technologies, but lays out lines of efforts and guidelines. And integrated solutions, assessing their impact continuously on future military strategies and capabilities. These are some of the resources that are part of the paper, several references, and these are direct links to the documents that are in support of the slides previously. Questions?
Actually, a bit of a comment. In uniform, I work operational command and control for troops back commands, so I live to see the day problem on there. If MOSA and all the other MOSAs are a US effort, we are encouraged leaving the C off of that. So if we're not putting the C, when we're looking at our open standards of making sense of data, we're never going to get the C covered. We have to make sure that we're providing, for example, I work in UConn and Africa, and I deal with NATO. NATO's got to be included, which is very different from Pacific. If they're both not part of the MOSA, we're not going to keep them out.
You're right. It's an enormous problem. I mean, and I will tell you in writing the white paper, the initial version of this, I think up until just a few months ago, long after the initial paper was submitted, the work that we had continued to do in the analysis was that the C was important. So the C of the CJADC2 in this presentation was a relatively new development. But even without the C, you're absolutely correct that the J, okay, just getting the coordination and the integration among the services is a huge problem by itself. And then adding on to it, the combined portion is another level of complexity. And as part of the increasing complexity, the more important it is to have like standards. So it's an enormous problem, you're right.
Yeah, large complex systems are known to exhibit emergent properties, that is, properties of the system integrated as a whole that were not predicted by the subsystems individually. So how does MOSA manage emergent properties?
I'm gonna need help on that one.
Yeah, so I think that one needs a beer, so.
I agree with that.
And I think we will, to get to the beer and that answer, we got to get moving. And with that, the next presentation is I'm pretty excited. So,